Dad spent my college fund on his 25-year-old girlfriend. Then she spent his money on her 30-year-old boyfriend, but now he demands money again, saying, I owe him. Hey, Reddit. So, this is going to be long, but I need to get this off my chest because what's happening right now is absolutely wild. I'm Estella, 29, female, and my dad just showed up at my condo last week demanding $50,000 because apparently I owe him for raising me. The absolute audacity of this whole situation. But let me back up and give you the full story because this goes way deeper than just some random shakedown. My mom died when I was 9 from ovarian cancer. She was 34. It happened fast, too, like 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. I remember the hospital smell, the way my dad wouldn't look at me when the doctor came in that last time, and how everything just felt hollow afterward. Mom was the glue that held everything together. She worked as a dental hygienist, always made sure I did my homework, packed my lunches with little notes inside, actual parent stuff. Before she passed, Mom set up this whole thing for my education. She'd been saving since I was born, had it in some kind of trust fund specifically for college. Her parents helped contribute too. They weren't rich or anything, but they wanted to make sure their granddaughter had a shot at a good education since neither of them got to go to college themselves. The fund had about $80,000 in it by the time she died. That was 2005 money. So it would have easily covered a state school with some left over. Mom made my dad promise, and I mean really promise, like deathbed promise, that the money would only be used for my education. She knew him better than anyone, knew his weaknesses. My grandparents were trustees on the account too, just to make sure everything stayed legit. Mom was smart like that. Dad took her death hard, but not in the way you'd expect. He didn't become a grief-stricken widower who threw himself into being a good father. Nope. He became a completely different person. Started going out to clubs, bought a sports car he couldn't afford, began dressing like he was trying to relive his 20s. It was embarrassing to watch. I basically raised myself from age 9 to 18. Dad worked as a sales manager at a car dealership, so he had the income to keep the house and bills paid. But actual parenting, that died with Mom. He'd come home at 10 p.m., smelling like perfume and cigarettes, mumble something about work dinners, then pass out on the couch. Breakfast was whatever I could pour into a bowl. School events never showed up. Parent-teacher conferences forgot they existed. My grandparents tried to step in, but they lived 3 hours away and were dealing with their own grief over losing their daughter. They'd visit once a month, make sure I had clothes that fit and food in the fridge, slip me some cash for school stuff. They knew Dad was checked out, but what could they really do? He was my legal guardian. When I was 15, Dad started dating again. Nothing serious at first, just random women he'd meet at whatever bar he was frequenting that week. But then he met Stephanie. Oh man, Stephanie. This is where things really went sideways. Stephanie was 23 when they started dating. I was 15, so yeah, do the math. She was 8 years older than me. Dad was 42 at the time. Picture this. My dad bringing home a woman who was closer to my age than his, introducing her as his girlfriend and expecting me to just be cool with it. She had that whole Instagram influencer vibe before Instagram influencer was really a thing. Tons of makeup, extensions, always taking selfies, constantly talking about becoming a model. She moved into our house within 3 months, just showed up one day with suitcases and a smile, acting like we were going to be best friends. Hey, bestie, she'd say, like we were peers or something. It was weird and uncomfortable, and Dad was too wrapped up in whatever midlife crisis he was having to notice or care. Stephanie didn't work, like at all. She claimed she was building her brand and networking, which apparently meant spending 12 hours a day on social media and shopping online. All on Dad's dime, of course. Designer purses, expensive dinners, weekend trips to Miami. Dad funded all of it because he was desperate to prove he could still pull a woman half his age. She had this whole routine where she'd wake up at noon, spend 3 hours doing her makeup and hair, then post photos with captions like "Boss Babe Energy" and "Living My Best Life." Her idea of networking was commenting heart emojis on other influencers' posts. She'd order takeout for lunch because cooking was not her vibe, then spend the afternoon trying on clothes she'd ordered online and returning half of them. Dad ate it up, though. He'd come home from work and she'd greet him in some new outfit, and he'd just hand over his credit card for whatever she wanted next. It was pathetic to watch. He was so desperate to keep her interested that he'd agree to anything. New car? Sure. Vacation to the Bahamas? Absolutely. $500 haircut? Why not? Meanwhile, I'm microwaving ramen for dinner because nobody bought groceries, and asking Dad for $40 for a school field trip was like pulling teeth. Money doesn't grow on trees, he'd say, even as Stephanie posted Instagram stories from a spa day that cost more than my entire monthly food budget. My grandparents hated her immediately. They'd come visit, and Stephanie would parade around in outfits that cost more than their monthly mortgage, talking about her lifestyle goals while I ate cereal for dinner because nobody had gone grocery shopping. Grandma would pull Dad aside and tell him he was being irresponsible, that he needed to focus on me, but he'd just get defensive and say she was jealous of his happiness. The worst part was how Stephanie would sometimes try to act like she was my friend. She'd knock on my bedroom door and be like, "Hey, bestie, want to talk about boys? Or want to come shopping with me?" Like we were peers, like she wasn't dating my dad and actively making my life worse. I'd usually just say I had homework and close the door. She'd get offended and complain to Dad that I was being difficult and not accepting her. Dad would then lecture me about being more welcoming and making an effort. "She's trying," he'd say. "The least you can do is be polite." I was polite. I was just also trying to maintain boundaries with a woman barely older than me, who was dating my father and spending money that should have been going toward, raising a teenager. Things got worse when I turned 16. Stephanie started mentioning how expensive everything was, how Dad's salary wasn't enough to maintain her lifestyle. She'd make these passive-aggressive comments about how some families have money set aside for emergencies and how it's weird to keep college money locked up when it could be used for better things. Dad started looking at my college fund differently after that. I'd catch him and Stephanie having quiet conversations that would stop the second I walked into the room. My grandparents noticed too and started calling more often, checking in on the fund status. Junior year of high school, I came home one day and overheard Dad on the phone with the fund administrator. He was asking about early withdrawal penalties and whether the money could be accessed for family emergencies. I felt my stomach drop. That money was supposed to be mine. It was Mom's final gift to make sure I had opportunities she never got. I called my grandparents that night from my room, voice shaking, telling them what I'd heard. Grandpa got real quiet, then said they'd handle it. Within a week, they'd restructured the trust so Dad couldn't touch it until I turned 18 and started college. Dad was furious when he found out, screaming at them over the phone about how he was the parent and they were overstepping. Stephanie cried actual tears about how they were sabotaging her future, which was a wild thing to say about someone else's kid's college money. The next 2 years were tense. Dad barely spoke to me unless he needed something. Stephanie treated me like I was the reason she couldn't get her hands on that money. They made it clear I was in the way of their lifestyle goals. I spent most of my time at the library or at friends' houses, just avoiding the toxic atmosphere at home. I graduated high school with a 3.07 GPA and got accepted to a solid state university 3 hours away, coincidentally in the same city as my grandparents. The day I turned 18, I went with Grandpa to the bank and transferred the fund into my name. It had grown to about $92,000 with interest, enough for 4 years of tuition, books, and some living expenses if I was careful. Dad acted like I'd stolen from him, like that money was his all along, and I was just being selfish by using it for its intended purpose. Stephanie posted vague Facebook statuses about ungrateful children and family betrayal. I moved into the dorms 2 weeks later and barely looked back. College was the first time I felt like I could breathe. I studied computer science, joined a few clubs, made actual friends who didn't know anything about my dysfunctional home life. My grandparents came to every parents' weekend. Dad didn't show up once in 4 years, didn't even call on my birthday most years. Freshman year was an adjustment, but in the best way possible. I had a roommate named Tyler who came from this big, normal family that actually liked each other. They'd invite me to their family dinners sometimes, and I'd sit there watching them joke around and genuinely enjoy being together, feeling like I was observing some alien species. That's what normal looked like, apparently. I threw myself into my classes. Computer science clicked for me in a way nothing else ever had. The logic, the problem solving, the way everything had clear rules and outcomes. If you wrote good code, it worked. If you made a mistake, you could debug it and fix it. Unlike family dynamics, where nothing made sense and everything was arbitrary, my professors liked me because I actually showed up and did the work, got invited to join the honors program sophomore year, made dean's list every semester. None of which Dad ever acknowledged because I stopped sending him updates after the first semester when he responded to my 3.9 GPA with, "That's nice," and then asked if I'd heard about Stephanie's new business idea. Grandma and Grandpa visited once a month. We'd go to dinner at this Italian place near campus, and I'd tell them everything. My classes, my projects, the tech startup competition I'd entered with some classmates. They actually listened, actually remembered details from previous conversations, actually cared about my life. Junior year, I got an internship at a software company that turned into a job offer for after graduation. Grandpa took me out for steak to celebrate. "Your mother would be so proud," he said, getting emotional. "This is exactly what she wanted for you. Opportunities, success, a real future." Senior year flew by. Between classes, my part-time coding job, and my senior project, I barely had time to think about Dad's dysfunction. My friends were planning graduation parties and talking about their families coming. I told them my grandparents were coming and left it at that. Nobody needed to know about Dad. I graduated in 2018 with my degree and a job offer at a tech company in the same city. Started at $58,000 a year, which felt like a fortune at the time. Got my own apartment, bought reliable furniture from IKEA, actually had a refrigerator with real food in it. Life was good. My grandparents and I had dinner every Sunday. They were so proud of me, said Mom would have been proud too. Those dinners were the closest thing I had to real family. Meanwhile, Dad and Stephanie were still living their best lives back in my hometown. Or so I thought. I kept tabs through distant relatives and social media. Stephanie was still posting aspirational content, except now it was about being a life coach and selling some multi-level marketing skin cream. Dad had switched jobs twice, always chasing bigger commission checks. They seemed fine, so I kept my distance and focused on building my career. Then about 3 years ago, when I was 26, I got a Facebook message from Dad. First time he'd reached out in literally years. My gut immediately knew something was wrong because this man didn't do casual check-ins. The message was short. "Hey daughter, can we talk? Need to discuss something important." I let it sit for a day before responding. Part of me was curious. Part of me knew I was about to be asked for something. I agreed to meet him for coffee at a place near my apartment. He drove up solo. No Stephanie, which was immediately suspicious. Dad looked rough. He'd aged badly, gained weight, had this defeated look in his eyes. We did the awkward small talk thing for about 5 minutes before he got to the point. "I need help," he said. "I'm in some financial trouble." Apparently, Stephanie's lifestyle had finally caught up with him. He'd maxed out 3 credit cards funding her various business ventures that never panned out. Took out a second mortgage on the house for her to start an online boutique that failed within 6 months. Borrowed money from friends that he couldn't pay back. He was drowning in about $90,000 in high-interest debt and facing foreclosure. "I know we haven't been close," he said, "but you're doing well now. I need to borrow some money to get back on my feet. Maybe 15 or 20,000 to get the creditors off my back." I sat there staring at this man who'd let his girlfriend trash-talk me for years, who'd tried to steal my college fund, who couldn't be bothered to show up for my graduation, and I felt absolutely nothing except a cold sort of clarity. "Where's Stephanie?" I asked. His face darkened. "She left, moved out 2 months ago." Turns out Stephanie had been cheating on Dad for the past year with some personal trainer named Derek, who was 30 years old. She'd been funneling Dad's money to Derek, paying for his gym equipment, his protein supplements, his rent. When Dad finally went broke and couldn't fund her lifestyle anymore, she bounced. Just packed up all her designer stuff and moved in with Derek. Didn't even leave a note. Dad found out through a mutual friend who sent him screenshots of Stephanie and Derek posting couple photos from a vacation to Cancun. A vacation Dad thought Stephanie was taking with her girlfriends. When he confronted her, she admitted everything and said she'd never actually loved him, just liked what he could provide. Then she blocked him on everything and disappeared. So here was Dad, broke and alone, asking me for money after everything he'd put me through. The irony was almost funny. "No," I said simply. His face went from hopeful to confused. What? I'm not giving you money. You made your choices. You chose Stephanie over me for years. You tried to steal Mom's money that she specifically saved for my education. You ignored me my entire teenage years. And now you want me to bail you out? No. He started getting angry then, doing that thing he used to do where he'd raise his voice and expect people to fold. I raised you. I kept a roof over your head. You owe me. You did the bare minimum that the law required, I said, keeping my voice level. And even then, Grandma and Grandpa did more parenting than you ever did. You don't get to call in a debt that doesn't exist. That college money should have been mine, he shouted loud enough that other people in the coffee shop turned to look. Your mother was my wife. That was marital money. That money was in a trust specifically for my education. Mom knew exactly what she was doing when she set it up that way. And you know what? She was right to protect it from you. I stood up to leave. Dad grabbed my arm. You're really going to let your father lose everything? I pulled my arm away. You did that to yourself. Don't contact me again unless you're ready to actually apologize for being a terrible father. And even then, the answer about money is still no. I walked out and didn't look back. Blocked his number that night. Felt guilty for about 2 days. Then remembered every missed birthday, every time he chose Stephanie over me, every time my grandparents had to step in because he couldn't be bothered. The guilt disappeared pretty quick after that. My grandparents were proud of me for standing my ground. Grandpa said, "Your mother didn't sacrifice everything to save that money, just so he could waste it on bad decisions. You did right." I thought that was the end of it. Figured Dad would hit rock bottom, maybe learn some lessons, and we'd both move on with our lives on separate paths. Then last month, my grandpa died. He was 78, had a heart attack in his sleep. It was peaceful at least, but it destroyed me and Grandma. He'd been my rock, my real father figure. The funeral was small, just family and close friends. Dad showed up, which surprised me. He looked even worse than before. Older, beaten down by life. We didn't really talk beyond basic condolences. He left right after the service. I thought that would be it. 3 weeks later, last Tuesday actually, there's a knock on my condo door at 8 at night. I open it, and there's Dad standing there with this determined look on his face. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into my place. I was too shocked to immediately shut the door. "What are you doing here? How did you even get my address?" "I have my ways," he said, which I assumed meant he'd harassed one of my distant relatives into giving it up. He looked around my condo, the nice furniture I'd bought with my own money, my big TV, my gaming setup, the kitchen I'd renovated last year. I could see him doing the math, seeing that I was doing well for myself. His eyes lingered on everything. The leather couch, the expensive coffee maker, the framed art on the walls. "Nice place," he said, but not in a complimentary way. In a bitter way, like my success was somehow offensive to him. "Dad, you need to leave." "I told you your grandfather left you money," he interrupted. "I know he did. He told me years ago that he'd set up something for you in his will." He wasn't wrong. Grandpa had left me $75,000 in his will. With Grandma's blessing, he'd wanted to make sure I had a nest egg, maybe enough for a down payment on a house someday, but the will wasn't even through probate yet. How did Dad know the amount? "That's none of your business," I said, trying to keep my voice level, even though I was getting angry. "I'm still your father," he said, voice rising. "And I'm in trouble again. Worse this time. I'm getting sued by credit card companies. The house is definitely going into foreclosure next month. I've got medical bills piling up from a surgery I had to have. I need help. So, get a second job. File for bankruptcy. Figure it out. That's not my problem." His face hardened, and I could see that familiar anger building, the same look he'd get when I was a kid and dared to question him. "I raised you for 18 years, fed you, clothed you, kept you alive. You owe me. Society agrees. Kids are supposed to help their parents when they get older. It's called being a decent human being." I almost laughed at that logic. The absolute nerve of this man standing in my home looking around at everything I'd earned through my own hard work, expecting me to just hand over cash because we shared DNA. "You mean Grandma and Grandpa raised me? They fed me half the time, bought my clothes, paid for school supplies. They taught me how to be a functioning adult. You were too busy with Stephanie to notice I existed. I paid the mortgage, I paid the bills. I worked 60-hour weeks at that dealership to keep a roof over your head. The bare legal minimum. Cool. Want a medal? You did what the law required you to do to not get charged with child neglect? That doesn't entitle you to my money now. He stepped closer, getting into my space. Your mother would be ashamed of you, letting me suffer like this. That crossed a line. Don't you dare, I said quietly. Don't you dare use Mom to guilt me. She set up that college fund specifically because she knew you couldn't be trusted. She knew you'd waste money on whatever shiny thing caught your attention. And guess what? She was right. You wasted it on Stephanie, who then wasted it on Derek. That's not my fault, and it's not my responsibility to fix. You're taking your grandfather's money from my father-in-law who never liked me anyway, and you won't even give me a fraction to help out your own father. Grandpa didn't like you because you were a lousy husband and a worse father. He saw how you treated Mom toward the end, making everything about you. He saw how you abandoned me. And yeah, I'm taking that money because I earned it by being there for him, by having Sunday dinners every week, by actually caring, something you never did for anyone but yourself. Dad's face turned red. I'm not leaving here until you agree to help me. I need $50,000. You've got it. You've got your fancy tech job, this nice place, and now an inheritance. You can spare it. Get out. No. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the police. You're in my home uninvited. That's trespassing. He tried to grab my phone. I stepped back and he missed, stumbling slightly. That's when I noticed he'd been drinking. Not heavily, but enough to make him bolder and dumber than usual. You little punk, he spat. After everything I've done, you've done nothing. That's the problem. Now leave before this gets worse for you. I had 911 dialed, but not called yet, finger hovering over the button. Something in my expression must have convinced him I was serious because he backed off. Fine, he said, but this isn't over. You're going to regret this. That's a threat. I want you to leave now. He walked to the door, turned back with this look of pure hatred. You're dead to me. You hear me? Dead. Cool, I said. Feelings mutual. He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood there shaking, not from fear, but from anger. The absolute nerve of this man showing up after years of neglect and expecting me to hand over 50 grand like it was nothing. I called my grandma right after to tell her what happened. She was horrified. That man has some nerve. Your grandfather would have thrown him out on his rear end. I basically did, I said. Good. You don't owe him anything, sweetheart. Not a penny. He made his choices. I thought that would be the end of it. Dad would slink away, file bankruptcy, lose the house, and start over with nothing. Tough lesson, but hey, natural consequences for natural stupidity. But no, because apparently Dad decided if he couldn't guilt me into giving him money, he'd try to legally force me. 3 days ago, I got served actual legal papers. Dad is suing me for financial support of an indigent parent. Apparently, there's some old filial responsibility law still on the books in our state that says adult children can be required to financially support parents who can't support themselves. The lawsuit claims I make substantial income, received a substantial inheritance, and am refusing to help my father in his time of desperate need. And it's asking for $50,000 in immediate support plus ongoing monthly payments until he's financially stable. I called a lawyer immediately. Her name's Patricia. She specializes in family law, and she's seen cases like this before. Filial responsibility laws almost never work in the parent's favor, she told me during our consultation. Especially when there's evidence of parental neglect or abandonment. The courts generally side with adult children who can prove the parent failed in their duties. Can you prove neglect? Could I prove it? I had years of documentation. School records showing Dad never attended a single event. Medical records from when I broke my arm at 14, and my grandparents took me to the hospital because Dad was too busy. Text messages from high school saved in an old phone where I asked Dad to come to my science fair, and he responded, "Can't, have plans." Report cards he never signed. College graduation photos he's not in because he didn't show up. Plus, I had my grandparents as witnesses. Well, Grandma now. She was ready to testify about every time she had to step in because Dad was absent. Your father's going to have a hard time proving he deserves support from someone he didn't support, Patricia said, especially when we show the pattern of neglect and his attempt to misuse your college fund, plus the fact that his financial trouble is entirely self-inflicted from poor decisions. not medical issues or disability. We filed a response denying all claims and including a counter motion to dismiss with prejudice. I also filed for a restraining order, citing his threatening behavior at my condo. The preliminary hearing is next week. Patricia's confident we'll win, but even having to deal with this is exhausting. Dad's lawyer, some guy who probably works on contingency, keeps trying to paint me as this heartless daughter abandoning her struggling father. They're even trying to use Mom's death as sympathy points, claiming Dad sacrificed everything to raise a child alone. It's such garbage. Dad sacrificed nothing. He chose a girlfriend over his kid, wasted money on someone who was using him, and now expects me to fix his mistakes. The audacity of trying to use Mom's memory to guilt me when he disrespected everything she tried to do for me, it makes my blood boil. Mom specifically structured that college fund to protect me from Dad's poor judgment. She knew. She saw his patterns even back then. Grandma's been my rock through this. Your grandfather dealt with your father's nonsense for years, she told me yesterday. He'd be telling you the same thing I am. Don't you dare give that man a penny. He doesn't deserve it. My friends think I should just pay him off to make it go away. It's $50,000, one said. You've got it. Why deal with court? Just pay him and move on with your life. Because it's the principle. If I pay him now, he'll just come back asking for more when he inevitably wastes this money too. And more importantly, I'd be spitting on everything Mom and my grandparents did to protect me and provide for me. That college fund wasn't just money. It was Mom's last act of love, making sure I'd have opportunities she didn't get to have. It was her dying wish, her final protection against Dad's selfishness. Grandpa's inheritance wasn't just money. It was recognition for being there, for caring, for being family. When Dad couldn't be bothered. Dad sees dollar signs. I see the sacrifices good people made to give me a better life. There's no universe where I reward his neglect and selfishness with cash. So, here we are. Court date next Friday. I've got a binder full of evidence, a witness ready to testify, and a lawyer who specializes in shutting down these exact situations. Dad's got his contingency lawyer and a story full of holes. Patricia told me yesterday that Dad's lawyer already tried to feel out a settlement. They'd drop the suit if I gave him $15,000 as a good faith gesture toward reconciliation. I told her, absolutely not. We're going to trial if we have to. Good, Patricia said, because when we win, we're going to ask the court to make him pay your legal fees too. Actions have consequences. I'm not nervous about losing. The law is pretty clear, and Patricia's good at what she does. I'm just tired of this man inserting himself into my life only when he wants something. After the restraining order hearing next week, he won't be able to contact me directly anymore. After we win the dismissal, he can't try this again. Then maybe, I can finally close this chapter and move forward without looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next demand. Update post-trial. So, the hearing happened yesterday, and honestly, even better than Patricia predicted. We got to the courtroom early. Dad showed up 10 minutes late with his lawyer, looking like he'd slept in his car. His lawyer immediately requested a continuance, claiming they needed more time to prepare. The judge, this no-nonsense woman in her 60s, asked why they'd need more time for a case they filed. Your Honor, we've discovered some new circumstances that require investigation, his lawyer started. Like what? Judge Williams asked. Well, character witnesses, financial records, evidence of the plaintiff's condition. You mean the things you should have had before filing? The judge did not look amused. Continuance denied. Let's proceed. Patricia went first. She laid out the timeline of Dad's neglect with surgical precision, presented school records, medical records, testimony from my grandma via video call since she couldn't travel, showed text messages proving Dad's absence, brought up the college fund situation and Dad's attempt to access it inappropriately. Then she brought up Stephanie, showed Facebook posts and bank statements proving Dad's financial problems were self-inflicted from funding a girlfriend's lifestyle, showed the breakup timeline matching his financial collapse. Dad's lawyer tried to object multiple times, but Judge Williams kept overruling. This is all relevant to whether the plaintiff fulfilled his parental duties and whether his current financial state is deserving of court-ordered support. When it was Dad's turn, his lawyer called him to testify. Big mistake. Patricia cross-examined him, and it was brutal. She asked about every school event he missed, every birthday he forgot, every time my grandparents had to step in. Dad tried to justify it all with, I was working to provide. But Patricia had his work record showing he took plenty of time off for personal trips with Stephanie. Then Patricia asked about the college fund. Mr. Johnson, did you attempt to access your daughter's education fund for personal use? That was marital money. It was held in a trust specifically for education, was it not? Well, yes, but... And you attempted to withdraw it for non-educational purposes, correct? We had expenses. Expenses like funding Stephanie Mitchell's lifestyle? Correct. Vacations to Miami, designer purchases, startup costs for failed business ventures? Dad's lawyer objected. Judge Williams overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Johnson. I provided for my girlfriend, yes, while neglecting to provide adequate emotional support and presence for your minor daughter? That's when Dad got angry and said something incredibly stupid. I gave her everything I was legally required to give. She had food and shelter. That's all kids are entitled to. The courtroom went quiet. Even his own lawyer flinched. Judge Williams leaned forward. Mr. Johnson, are you genuinely arguing that you fulfilled your parental obligations by meeting only the bare minimum legal standard? I mean, I did what I could, but... You had resources for vacations, for supporting an adult girlfriend, for lifestyle expenses, resources you chose not to direct toward your daughter's well-being. That was my personal money. And now you're asking the court to force your daughter to share her personal money with you, despite you choosing not to prioritize her when she was a minor under your care. Do I have that right? Dad realized he'd walked into a trap but couldn't back out. I just need help. From someone you admittedly did the bare minimum for. Someone whose education fund you attempted to misappropriate. Someone who, by your own admission, you viewed as entitled only to the legal minimum of care. Judge Williams looked at Dad like he was something stuck to her shoe. Mr. Johnson, I've been a family court judge for 23 years. I've ruled in favor of parents when there's genuine need and evidence of good parenting, followed by unfortunate circumstances. This is not that case. She went on for another 5 minutes, systematically destroying Dad's argument. Then she ruled, case dismissed with prejudice, meaning Dad can't try this again. Additionally, Dad has to pay my legal fees, all $35,000, plus court costs. The restraining order was granted, making it illegal for him to contact me for 2 years. Dad's face went white. His lawyer tried to argue for a payment plan on the legal fees. Judge Williams set it at $500 a month, which Dad clearly can't afford, meaning it'll likely go to collections and tank whatever's left of his credit. As we left the courtroom, Dad tried to approach me. A bailiff immediately stepped between us and reminded him about the restraining order that was now in effect. Dad just stood there looking defeated. Patricia and I went for lunch to celebrate. That went better than expected, she said. He really self-destructed on the stand. Never seen someone torpedo their own case that efficiently. I texted Grandma right after. She called me immediately, crying happy tears. Your grandfather would have loved to see that. Justice for you and for your mother. My phone's been blowing up since yesterday. Apparently some family members were in the courtroom and word spread fast. Distant aunts and uncles are reaching out. Some supportive, some saying I was too harsh. I'm ignoring most of it. The thing is, I don't feel victorious exactly. I feel resolved, like a chapter that should have closed years ago finally has its ending. Dad made choices, and those choices had consequences. The court just made those consequences official. He's going to lose the house. There's no avoiding that now with the legal fees added to his debt. He'll probably have to file bankruptcy, start completely over in his 50s with nothing. That's brutal. But it's also what happens when you spend 20 years making consistently terrible decisions and expecting other people to fix them. Some people are asking if I'll ever reconcile with him. Honestly, no. The restraining order expires in 2 years, but I have no interest in a relationship with someone who saw me as an ATM instead of a daughter. He had decades to be a father. He chose not to. That's not something you fix with an apology. I'm taking Grandma out to dinner tonight. She's moving closer to me next month. We found a nice senior community about 15 minutes from my place. I'll be her family now, the way she and Grandpa were mine when Dad couldn't be bothered. As for Dad's money situation, he's got options. social services, bankruptcy protection, public assistance programs. He can downsize his lifestyle and start over. He's only 56. Plenty of time to rebuild if he actually learns from this. But that's his journey to figure out, not mine to fund. So yeah, Reddit, that's the update. Case dismissed, restraining order granted, legal fees awarded in full. Dad's on his own to figure out the mess he made. And me? I'm finally truly free from his dysfunction and his demands. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube, this video deserves to blow up.